Welcome once more to Part 12. The last video introduced a new model that allows for returns across the stock market to come from places other than economic fair value returns. If those additional returns are zero in each time period, we're back to CAPM. Average market returns in the new model have this form, which we saw in the last video. With this video, we begin to put everything into a mathematical framework. There is a lot here, and the next video will provide a worked example that will clarify things. We start with the average ideal return of the market equal to the weighted average of the ideal returns of the constituent securities that make up the market. The same goes for the average market perturbation return. From the last video, there are two sources of return for the market in the next time period: ideal return and perturbation return. There is only one source of market return in the long run, ideal return, since the expected return of the perturbations in each time period is zero, and the perturbations are mean reverting. However, there are two sources of variation or risk. This distorts the results from OLS, as will be clear. Therefore, ordinary least squares regression will not work as an estimation process. In this video, I continue setting up and defining the pieces of the perturbation risk model. An ideal market is a market where returns are free from perturbations. There are no ambiguities or unanswered questions about relative performance or relative volatility. Neither is there idiosyncratic risk in an ideal market. Ideal beta is the sensitivity of a security or portfolio to ideal excess returns. Ideal systematic risk is determined by ideal beta and ideal market risk alone. Traditional systematic risk is systematic risk as traditionally understood through the lens of CAPM. Borrowing a phrase from traditional capital market theory, ideal systematic risk is the only risk that gets rewarded over time. Here is some notation showing the difference between CAPM notation and ideal notation. The model developed in the next several videos will be called the forward perturbation risk model. The forward perturbation risk model is an ex-ante model that starts with parameters and works toward expected market statistics. The backward perturbation risk model is an ex-post model that starts with market statistics and works toward parameter estimates. If ideal beta is the sensitivity to ideal excess returns, then the returns of the low CAPM beta portfolio using ideal beta will have this form, where R sub PLT is the perturbation return for the low CAPM beta portfolio in period T. If we assume that the average perturbation returns are zero over time, then the expected average return of the low CAPM beta portfolio equals the ideal low beta times the excess return of the market, because the average ideal return equals the average market return when the average perturbation is zero. Remember the form of CAPM with alpha, which means if the average perturbations are zero over time, the expected return of the low CAPM beta portfolio using the ideal expression can be set equal to the expected return using the CAPM expression, including an alpha term. This looks as if in 12.5a and b, the original form of CAPM by Sharp is set equal to the form with alpha. While this appears to be true in this instance, it is not what is going on. If it were, it would tell us nothing about the systematic nature of the volatility effect. Moving around the terms of 12.5a and b, we get this formula for expected alpha. Although we are assuming for the time being that the average perturbation over time for both portfolios is zero, it's likely that the individual time periods have non-zero perturbations. This will make all the difference. That is, the aggregate perturbation returns are assumed to be zero over time, but not in the individual time periods. It will be demonstrated in the next couple of videos that alpha has an expectation different from zero, usually. We are now entering into the weeds of the model, and will remain there for the rest of the videos. The notation is often subtle. It's almost certainly true that CAPM beta does not equal ideal beta while still maintaining these two identities. In order to get at the quantitative difference between CAPM beta and ideal beta, we have to look at their formulas. The formula for estimated CAPM beta ex post as found in any textbook is as follows. The formula for ideal beta is similar. Note the differences. The formula for CAPM beta is what it's always been. The formula for ideal beta is in reference to the ideal world. Here in one line is the derivation of the formula for the covariance between ideal portfolios in the market. Remember that in the ideal returns of the market, there are no error terms or unanswered questions about relative performance, which gives us a second derivation for ideal beta. Next is the decomposition of market risk. Take the variance of both sides. I am assuming that the covariance between the market and the perturbations is zero. Ultimately, this is only an okay assumption, but it's good enough for our purposes. Finally, then, we switch to a better-looking notation. Recall from the video on Jensen's alpha that ex-post return variance of an asset using CAPM components has this derivation. Take the variance of both sides. Isolated constants drop out. Constant coefficients get pulled out and squared. And of course, we change to a better-looking notation. Variance of returns for the low CAPM beta portfolio under the perturbation risk model. Take the variance of both sides. Isolated constants drop out. Constant coefficients get pulled out and squared. And of course, we change to a better-looking notation. Under CAPM and PRM, the variance equations are structurally identical and they have the same output, but the inputs are different. I want to take a few moments to emphasize that perturbation risk is not the same as idiosyncratic risk. Here are the differences between idiosyncratic risk and perturbation risk. By construction, idiosyncratic residuals sum to zero across all securities in each time period. Perturbations likely do not sum to zero in any time period. By construction, idiosyncratic returns sum to zero across a fixed time for each individual security. Perturbations likely do not sum to zero across a selected fixed time for any security, although they could. Idiosyncratic returns are another name for residuals in OLS regression. Perturbation returns have nothing to do with OLS except under unlikely conditions. Idiosyncratic risk is independent from traditional systematic risk. Perturbation risk is independent from ideal systematic risk, but it is not independent from traditional systematic risk. In fact, it's part of the formula, as will be seen in just a moment. The distinction between perturbation risk and idiosyncratic risk is the key that unlocks the volatility effect and other issues. In a later video, I will derive the mathematical relationship between idiosyncratic risk and perturbation risk, but for now it's sufficient to say that they are not at all the same thing and should not be confused. Back to market perturbation risk. If an index is divided into two equally weighted pieces, the high CAPM beta portfolio and the low CAPM beta portfolio, then the formula for the variance of the market perturbation is, for at least several videos, I'm going to assume that the covariance between the perturbations is zero. This is not a good assumption. However, it keeps the calculations and reasoning clean and understandable. This assumption carries the story a long way forward before it needs to be discarded. After I have done what I can with it, and it ultimately fails, it will be much easier to insert the more realistic and complex assumption back in. So assuming that the covariance between perturbations is zero, we get 12.13. In here is the market variance PRM decomposition. Assuming that the covariance between perturbations is zero. Now for a few items needed to complete the initial setup. The covariance between the ideal returns of the low CAPM beta portfolio and the high CAPM beta portfolio are as seen here. The next one is a little messy, so you might want to stop the video at times. We need the covariance between the low CAPM beta portfolio and the market portfolio. The covariance between the return of the low CAPM beta portfolio and the market portfolio equals the covariance between the ideal and perturbation returns of the low CAPM beta portfolio and the ideal and perturbation returns of the market. Since I am assuming the perturbation returns are independent from the ideal market returns, the parts in red are zero and drop out. And with a change in notation and a little cleanup, it becomes, assuming that the covariance between the perturbations is zero, the derivation for the high beta portfolio is identical. The covariance between the high and low CAPM beta portfolios follows a similar derivation. assuming that the covariance between perturbations is 0, which is the same as the formula for ideal covariance between the two portfolios. Finally, using this information, I want to show the formula for CAPM beta written in the mathematical vocabulary of the perturbation risk model. Assuming that the covariance between perturbations is 0, stated without derivation, assuming that the covariance between perturbations is 0. In this video, there have been a whole lot of formulas without calculations. The next video will have an example that will clarify what it all means, but it will only be a piece of the story. Before I end, here is a summary of the formulas set to music.